And I think it's going to be bigger than the world GDP in the next 20 years. And that's like 50 trillion of annual revenue. Another thing I'm kind of excited about that I've been seeing is like the potential for using rockets to travel on Earth. If I wanted to go to Australia, you can just get launched up in a rocket again in like an hour.
Which is to send a mission to Venus.
It's above the atmosphere.
So the surface is very hot. It's like 90 degrees or whatever. And if you go up, well, you could have a floating city.
Yeah.
What's really the value prop of like living out in space?
One is it's cool as hell.
So what's new with space this week?
The biggest thing I think is the nomination of Jarek Isaacman to head up NASA. And I think it's a really, really good sign for commercial space.
Okay. So I heard that NASA shut down some of its things. Is that true? Or NASA's still going to space?
Yes, they're still going to space. So nomination of Jarek Isaacman makes some people think that SLS is going to be canceled.
Okay.
But NASA has been a little bit cash-strapped recently. And so they've actually been shutting down some missions. Because Congress requires them to do certain things. And one of the things that Congress requires them to do is spend money on SLS.
Okay. And why space? What are we doing in space? Is it to combat global warming? Is it to send people to space for future space travel? Are we trying to see if there's aliens? Like what's the reason we're going to space?
Right. So I think on the commercial side, the biggest reason is there's just advantages to doing things in space or from space. So one of them is communication. So Starlink, which everybody knows, but also competitors like ASD Space Mobile. There's advantages to being in orbit for communications, especially if you have these large constellations of satellites, because then you can get consistent coverage across the planet, no matter where you are, even if you're in the middle of the ocean, middle of the desert. You can get pretty good coverage. The other good thing to do in space is Earth observation. So whether that's in pictures or something called synthetic aperture radio, you basically just get constant coverage of the planet itself. So, weather, like what's happening on the planet, shipments of oil, like those kinds of things. And then the other angle here is more on the government side is the geopolitical angle. Space is becoming a little bit more contested. China coming onto the space scene as well is creating a bit of competition between America and China. And so there's some investments in space from that angle.
So why I like it from an investment perspective is it seems very speculative. And I think the first thing people have in mind is, us traveling and settling on space, which seems a little bit inconceivable and maybe not even the biggest priority given all the challenges we face as a society. But that being said, I think that people are completely underestimating the size of the opportunity and how transformational it's going to be. And I think it's going to be bigger than the world GDP in the next 20 years. And that's like 50 trillion of annual revenue. And the way I'm coming up with that is there are just drastically better solutions than what we have on Earth. Like, for example, Starlink can give internet access to anybody, no matter where they are. That compared to setting up telephone poles in random places, that's like, come on, like we can do better than that, right? The other piece is we can actually track climate disasters well before they're actually happening and kind of see the impacts of our actions and emissions while it happens, while also being able to kind of track, shipments of critical goods and, think about national defense. So I think these are all like just drastically better than the solutions on Earth, and they're strategically important. In addition to that, I think a big other thing that's going to happen is, or it's already happening, but I think it will take a few years to play out, is that there's an insatiable demand for power. And what that means right now is like literally all of our data centers and electricity is going to be powering all the AI stuff that's going to be happening. But what that means is, at some point, like residential usage might get crowded out by, like the cost of electricity might go up a lot, like the real estate might just be taken up to literally just build data centers and use that in AI. Eventually you run out of space. People can't, real estate prices go up, like power costs go up, and like all of that is like negative for humanity. But I think that could be really powerful if you launch satellites in space that can basically become space data centers where they're solar powered. The efficacy of solar power is actually significantly stronger outside of Earth's atmosphere. We can actually transmit that power down to Earth. We can beam it down to Earth to give cheap, abundant electricity for everybody, and then also use the excess electricity to power all these like really crazy AI applications. So you could actually just like get everything all in one, as in like we can actually clean up the Earth, reduce emissions, and give people way more access to intelligence and, improve the quality of life significantly. So yes, it's not obviously tangible, but I do think it's the one fell swoop to solve a lot of the problems that we've been seeing in society through like the inevitable solution that I see.
Do you think that certain countries can gatekeep some of those things? So say you talked about this race between us and China, and let's throw in Russia.
Yeah.
If we find that out, Are we going to give that access to everybody in the world? Is that something we're going to keep for ourselves?
Yeah, I think the thing very long term, my thesis around it, and this is kind of getting sci-fi, but I think when humanity actually gets to space and there's a significant presence there, the current governance structure doesn't make any sense. Like I think there's going to have to be like some kind of unified world government, and the people that actually could like, are launching things in space and kind of gaining that economic value are going to have an outsized influence on what we do on Earth. But I think that requires collaboration, and it requires something that beyond just like naturalism. And in the short term, I think there will be probably a lot of positivity when it first comes out and collaboration. But then in the middle of that, I think there's going to be a lot of geopolitical conflicts, on Earth and out there. But then eventually I think that'll resolve in, a better system for us to be able to kind of coordinate ourselves and allow everybody to benefit from all the gains that are coming out there. But I do think the nation state system as it stands right now is almost the same as like a city state. Like it's like what Rome was like, hundreds of years ago. Eventually, like what we have as like individual governments doesn't really make sense.
Right.
Once we have something greater than that.
So there might be a race to do it first, but once the knowledge is out there, then we can all use
but this might take like, 100 years or longer, right? So this is kind of very long term in the future.
Yeah, hypothetical.
Yeah, there's technologies for taking down satellites, individual satellites. But with these new type of what's called proliferated, basically just means that there's like a lot of satellites. So if people try to take down all those satellites, it creates an environment where nobody can have their satellites up because it creates so much debris that like all the satellites get destroyed.
That's called like Kessler
syndrome. Yeah, exactly.
So that doesn't benefit anybody.
Exactly. So there's kind of like a forced good behavior in that sense, because it's like either all of us get to play in space or none of us get to play in space. And when it comes to things like planetary bodies, like the moon or asteroids, there's a specific space law that basically says like no governments cannot claim planetary bodies. But for example, if a company wants to go and mine resources of an asteroid, they have the right to the resources to sell them. And so then the other thing that's happening right now is related to us going to the moon is something called the Artemis Accords. And these are basically to try to create rules for how we engage in space, how different countries engage in space, so that we don't have these conflicts.
And I think like really the goal here is to have this, kind of a technology that's almost like the internet where anybody can access it. There's no blockage and it benefits everybody, right? So hopefully that can actually end up happening. But, of course, just knowing humanity, there's going to be some people that just want to grab it all for themselves, inevitably. But I think hopefully we can resolve
in the wrong hands
a situation that looks like the internet where everyone can benefit.
So there are laws regarding space.
There's laws regarding space. Obviously, because we haven't been mining asteroids and then going to the moon very much, we haven't really tested these laws.
Work. Yeah.
And how do you enforce it, right? So the Space Force is actually trying to safeguard. So similar to what the U.S. Navy did for being able to ship goods around the world, the U.S. Navy basically became the guarantor that, goods can travel across the oceans without being attacked and robbed and such. So
there is going to be something in place to be the middle.
So the remit of the Space Force is basically to allow like free navigation, but in space effectively. So
can you join Space Force in the same way you can join the Marines?
Yeah, I think they have both like military roles and civil roles. It's a bit of a fusion because obviously the space industry, like the talent doesn't exactly exist within the defense forces as it is. So there's actually a lot of roles for both civilians and within the military as well.
Okay, how do you apply for that?
On their website.
That's it?
Yeah.
Is that easy?
Yeah, exactly.
I have noticed that a lot of people in the space industry kind of come from like an Air Force type background from more of a military perspective.
Yeah, so some of the like observability and traffic management in space was previously done by the Air Force, and so up until now, they still do some space related things. They still do some contracts with space companies providing certain services. Yeah, but basically, that was the whole idea of splitting out the Space Force, so they would be a little bit more focused directly on the on space itself, because the Air Force kind of has this thing where they're not exactly incentivized to go all in on space because they have these other programs. Yeah, when it comes to fighter jets and stuff. So by creating a separate like arm of the defense forces, then the idea is that you allow them to focus specifically on space itself.
Yeah. So one thing I was also thinking about in terms of space is it feels like for the space thesis to succeed, we also need rapid advancements in a couple of other areas, one being AI, another being robotics, and perhaps the last one being like abundant energy. So I guess it's really three things. So do you see these all as like kind of interconnected areas where they all kind of drive each other forward?
Yeah, 100%. So robotics obviously is a big one. Being able to do stuff autonomously in space is very, very high dependency on making a lot of use of space.
Yeah.
The other one, AI is also intertwined. And so one example of this, I think it was Google DeepMind just released a new weather model. So it's an AI-based weather model, obviously using satellite data as their input. But basically, I think they found that they have better predictive abilities than the weather models that are built on physics. And so it could be that AI could allow us to make even more use out of the Earth observation data that we're taking from space.
Yeah.
So what's some cool space tech that's being created or being invented right now?
I think one cool and immediately useful thing right now is different sensing capabilities within like from space.
Okay.
And so there's some cool contracts based around that, basically being able to like detect water in the atmosphere a lot more accurately. And so
like infrared.
different spectrums. So for being able to understand, like heat, which could be useful for military as well as civilian applications. There's, for example, satellites that are able to detect methane that's leaking out of different pumps and stuff. And so we can basically like plug those gaps and then have less greenhouse gases go out. Another cool thing that's happening very recently related to Space Force and everything is delivery like from space to Earth. So getting shipments like in orbit that they stay there. And then if you need in an emergency, like, whether it's a wartime environment or a natural disaster, being able to like deliver some shipment immediately somewhere on the planet just by like hitting a button and just re-enters from space and delivers some packages.
That is
so a couple of things. I really like those applications, but a couple more tangible consumer applications I'm really excited about is Starlink, where imagine you can just have internet anywhere, like no spotty signal. You can use your laptop anywhere. Even if you're in the middle of Mexico or like some vacation spot, you don't have to worry about, signing up, and like, it's just a way better technology, right? And the other one is like, think about something better than like, maps. Like I hate these maps apps. They're just terrible, especially when you're in the middle of like the country and driving around. It's impossible to get around. Imagine just a way better version of that. And then also weather, right? Like just accurate weather. So these are just tangible improvements that are drastically just better than what we have right now. And, that's just going to, be available like very soon.
When you're on the subway or on a plane.
Yeah.
That's the worst.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And another thing that's potentially about to improve as well is navigation, like GPS.
Yeah.
So this is another one of those things that, given the hybrid warfare that's happening with Russia and other adversarial countries, the amount of area that's being GPS denied is actually increasing. So there's actually a bit of a underground problem that's happening right now is planes. There have been like some close calls of planes crashing because they're flown over areas that have been GPS denied.
That is wild to me. That's really scary.
Right. And so Space Force and Air Force are working on, and FAA are working on different technologies to do navigation, even in GPS denied areas. And so that's something else that's going to be practically useful.
Yeah.
And then on the Starlink side, one thing that limits how much utility you get out of satellites is basically like being able to beam the data back to the Earth,
right?
Using ground stations. So there's actually some improvements happening with ground stations themselves, but you actually also get this thing where you can actually use something like Starlink for communicating between satellites in space and then beaming that data down back to Earth.
Yeah.
And so that would basically allow you to get more utility out of the satellites that are out there as well.
Yeah. Another thing I'm kind of excited about that I've been seeing is like the potential for using rockets to travel on Earth. So if I wanted to go to Australia, you can just get launched up in a rocket and get there in like an hour, right? Isn't that like the thing people are talking about?
Yeah.
That's the plan?
That's the plan.
Yeah. So going back to, I guess, your question on space technologies as well, there's various like types of propulsion systems that are coming out of the space, like the space industry, which are trying to be applied to aviation. And so it's everything from, mixes of like hypersonic jets and stuff, but also, putting rockets on jetliners so they can travel Mach 6 and up, which would basically mean like a couple of hours, basically anywhere on the Earth.
Wow.
Or if you wanted to go all the way to the fastest possible, you've got using something like an actual rocket to deliver yourself basically anywhere on the planet, or people or goods anywhere on the planet basically within like an hour. And so that's something that like Elon Musk is talking about trying to do with Starship as well.
People are already afraid of flying. People are already taking Xanaxes. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Are we exploring other planets to see if they're habitable? Like, is that something that they're doing as well?
Yes. So this is going into the exploratory side, and actually there is a stock link in here as well, which I'll leave it till the end. So obviously NASA and other agencies are looking into, whether Mars was habitable at some point in the past. We also have missions that are going to Europa, one from the European Space Agency, one from NASA.
That's the Jupiter moon.
That's a moon of Jupiter that has an ocean underneath its crust. And we believe that ocean contains salts and other minerals, which would make it a very good environment.
The thing that's just inconceivable is some of these other planets are just so harsh that, like, I was hearing about, Venus, which seems very similar to Mars, but then
they have so many volcanoes, right?
Yeah, it's also like 900 degrees, and like you would literally just burst on.
The atmosphere is made out of sulfuric acid, so
Not a great place to center
if you didn't know. Europa. There's a mission that is going to be launched through space using SpaceX Falcon Heavy. That's going to be launched at Titan. Titan is a moon of Saturn, and it contains a hydrocarbon-rich atmosphere. So it's basically like CO2 and other carbon compounds like methane. It is very cold, so it's like way below freezing. But because it contains so many carbon compounds, it's also a possibility for life. And then the final interplanetary mission that I want to mention is actually one that's being done by Rocket Lab, which is a company you can invest in. So this is their fun side project, which is to send a mission to Venus.
Okay.
But we can't live on Venus, though, right? Or it's the moon on Venus, I think, is that?
No, it's Venus. So Venus doesn't have any moons. It's basically just, so Venus itself.
Oh, it's like it's above the atmosphere, right? Like you have to like.
Yeah, so the surface is very hot. It's like 900 degrees or whatever. But if you go up above the atmosphere, you get to a region which is the atmosphere is about as dense as Earth's atmosphere, and it's about the same temperature as Earth.
Okay.
But it's way up in the atmosphere. Right?
So how do you stay there?
Well, you could have a floating city.
Yeah.
You could have a floating city because it's so dense. You can have you would have
like Xenon.
Wait, so you just send something there and then it'll just stay in orbit. You don't even need to power it.
It would be an orbiter. And there's also missions to try to sample that atmosphere. So try to sample it in that region where it's possibly habitable, and try to see if there's anything within the.
So what's really the value prop of like living out in space? Is it because the human population is getting too big? Is it because the planet's going to be uninhabitable? Is it going to be some people out there for work for particular missions that are set up in those regions? Like what really is the pitch?
Yeah, I guess the pitches come in a couple of varieties. One is it's cool as hell. Yeah. It's futuristic, it's sci-fi. It's part of the human drive to explore and to go out.
But couldn't we just, inhabit the oceans and other parts
which would be significantly more habitable than space, for sure.
Yeah.
Antarctica is like significantly more.
Yeah, which is, they can't.
The other thing is, when it comes to the Earth dying off or something, that's going to happen in like a billion years. So, but there is a survivability argument, which is that something could kill everybody on Earth, and so you probably want people.
But before all this, maybe we should start inhabiting Nebraska and
that might be less hospitable than
go to Nebraska. Yeah. Wow. So I guess that is the argument that people are like, should we just invest all this money in making Earth better instead of trying to have it?
Yeah, but all that money is being invested on Earth, right?
Yeah,
it's within our economies. There's our human jobs on planet Earth, and there are advantages from space, right? So the list of technologies that we have simply because of space, is gigantic. Not to mention, modern life would not be possible without space. Like GPS, like having Uber, having being able to order things online, internet, like Starlink. Those are all.
I'm talking more about living on a different planet.
Those are for more of the adventurous people.
Right.
I think the more tangible thing is just drastically improving the quality of our products via using space to kind of, even another thing too is nuclear technology is obviously, huge potential, but then it could just create another Chernobyl. But what if we set out nuclear reactors in space where if it leaks, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? You can kind of just transmit that energy, right? So that's pretty exciting stuff.
So I think there is, a ban on nuclear weapons or reactors in space.
And is that basically because you don't want a floating nuclear weapon?
Effectively, yes. Yeah. Okay. I think a lot of there's a lot of advancements actually made in nuclear, the modular reactors for space uses, because one of the reasons reactors, or I think they're called RTGs, so they're basically these radioactive batteries. They generate heat, a small amount of heat, and that heat is converted to electricity. A lot of the probes used to be powered on before they started getting powered on solar energy. So your the Voyager probes, they're powered by RTGs.
Yeah.
And that probe that I was talking about that's going to Titan which is a low quadcopter that's going to go to Titan. That's also going to be powered by an RTG, which is obviously like a nuclear battery, effectively.
Yeah.
Small nuclear reactor. But there's a lot of SMR companies that, like, some of them are public, which are working on nuclear reactors for the moon. Because it's such a harsh environment, you basically are forced to innovate in order for it to function. And so what that means is that it's easier to operate on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Got it.
So actually one more last piece before we leave. I think another way of like kind of thinking about, the entire thesis we're kind of articulating here, because it's very multidisciplinary. It has implications for, you as an investor, you as a person, and, like hopefully it can drastically improve your life. It's not like you pick between going to space or improving life on Earth. It's actually just one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's one of the few things that can just drastically make everybody's life better with no like trade-offs, right? So I think that's pretty exciting to me. Another thing that I think it really opens up a lot of potential for is, there have been a lot of like EV companies and like kind of like solar companies that have kind of been battered down because, there's been a lot of potential. It hasn't quite moved as quickly as it needed. But I think that stuff is going to be super powerful in space, given the potency is just significantly more outside of Earth's orbit. And it's kind of necessary to have this self-sustaining fuel source out there, right? Because if we can't just like keep sending fossil fuels up there, I mean, I guess we could, but that's just not efficient.
Exactly.
So I think that could have a huge win. Like I think a lot of these like solar panel manufacturers could be great companies to look at. One that I recently bought is First Solar, that I think can benefit from this. It's a very long-term thesis, but I think that's definitely a thing to start thinking about too.
So that's something I can invest in.
Yeah. Also, everything that we talk about, every single stock that we talk about is something that we own. Obviously, you shouldn't listen to us if you don't know. NFA, not financial advice.
Now I need to go back to working on Revv.
Thank you for serving time, Turlock.